Members of council, looks like we're ready to go. Yeah, looks like everyone's back on the YouTube session. Everybody's been redirected. So if members of council can have their seat. All right, thank you, members of council, and thank you very much I think everybody's back live on now. So Director Loh, if you want to go ahead and continue your presentation.
Yes. After considering these three alternatives, the staff recommend alternative number 3. We set the reserve policy percentage to 12% of operating revenue or expenditure, whichever is more predictable, which is similar to our current policy, 16.6%, but we decrease the percentage based on the historical use of unassigned fund balance and our practice. So if we have any positive unassigned fund balance, which could be used for operation, just short-term operating deficit, or transfer to the capital project funds. If there's negative unassigned fund balance, which will be backfilled by the unrestricted reserve, which is 12% operating revenue or expenditure, until the unassigned fund balance back to 12% of level. So we are just open for conversation and questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Director Loh, for the presentation and the 3 options. Members of council, who wants to kick us off? Member Woodward.
Yes, I want to just make sure I understand now. The 12% is compared to the 16.7%?
Correct. We can see the numbers here.
Yeah, 12% for me seems a little low.
That's 1.5 months. Yeah.
2007 through 2013, and I mean I think council and staff was surprised at how well we did, and I think that has to do with the diversification of our revenue. If you went back further, and I'm not suggesting this, but if you went back to the end of Cinderella City and took a look at what happened to our finances then, I'm sure you'd see a different picture. So to me, 12% seems low and not comfortable. Less than 2 months of total reserve there.
Yeah, thank you. That's why I want to tell the story behind the numbers. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for your input.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Loh. Can you clarify your kind of concern about the ratcheting and sliding method? You talked about the fact that we tend to be pretty conservative on the projecting the revenues, and that would impact this reserve policy for exactly what reason? Because we would end up every year kind of having an excess revenue, so we would have kind of an ever-growing reserve policy. Is that the concern, or what is it exactly?
I think the concern is based on our budgeting technique. We bottle the spirit. Let's say if the actual is 10.5 million, the budget is 11 million. No, if the actual is 10.5, the budget 10 million, we'll have a half million be added to the reserve policy. That's not enough to make up the reserve policy up to a percentage. So our recommendation, we borrowed the spirit, but we modified by considering the unassigned fund balance, not just consider the revenue side. Because I feel expenditures and revenue and the fund balance need to be considered at the same time.
So you would add the unassigned fund balance and the total reserve policy to make a decision, to come to council to make a decision on how much to add to the reserve policy to get it back up to a percentage of.
No.
Okay.
We did not completely fully adopt the BAC's recommendation, just use the revenue expenditure.
Okay.
So we just consider their percentage they recommended, but still consider the fund balance level. So we disregard just the revenue portion. We feel that's probably not too practical given our practice.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Russell.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I mean, what if we do nothing? I mean, right now, we can, just like we did last year, we took all that overage from the 16.7 to put it in capital projects or wherever we needed it. Back in 2016, when we established the reserve policy, it wasn't just the reserve policy, it was our entire financial picture, and they all fit together. And I concur with Councilmember Woodward. I am very concerned that there could be an economic collapse even far worse than 2008. And if we start changing our policy right now, I think we could be in deep trouble. It wasn't just one thing we picked out. I really do believe that Manager Keck, that was one of the early things that he did when he came, because there was really no established policy in any of that area. And I believe that's important. So thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Mayor Pro Tem.
I think I'm probably the strongest advocate of ratcheting and sliding on this council. And I think the thing that most closely mirrors the concept of ratcheting and sliding is the Littleton policy we saw earlier, where Littleton seeks a range. First, I'll speak to the current policy, which is 16.67% of annual expenditures. So reading from the financial policies, section 5, which is on page 63 of your packet, sub 1, it says, notwithstanding other requirements and fund balance designations as described herein, it shall be the policy of the city to seek and maintain an unrestricted general fund balance equal to 16.67% of annual expenditures. My issue is with this being a policy that says this is the amount of money that we always keep in the bank, 16.67%. We are outside of policy if we have more than that in the bank, and we are outside of policy if we have less than that in the bank. 16.67% is the target. But that doesn't capture the purpose of reserves. The purpose of reserves, as I see it, is to build a cushion that allows for continuity of services in an economic downtime. So if we adopt a policy that gives us the ability to ratchet up during boom times and draw from that reserve when times are leaner, we can see the economic trends over the past 20 or 30 years, including the loss of Cinderella City, which could be cushioned to provide for continuity of government when revenues are reduced. So the citizens have a level of service that they can expect from the city that council can provide on a regular basis within a range of reserves. When the reserves slide down to a point where they reach whatever preset minimum we establish in policy, that's when we have to look at service cuts or furlough days or other painful solutions to the lack of revenue. So ratcheting and sliding, in my opinion, is the best way for the city to manage its money if the goal is to ensure that we have stability of services throughout the city.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Any other questions from Council Member Nooncamp?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. In staff's recommendation, you recommend alternative 3, which is to set the reserve percentage at 12%. Can you explain why you chose that number and why you support a reduction in the current reserve amount?
The finance team, we discussed the purpose of a reserve policy on assigned fund balance because there are layers. There are different components make up the fund balance. The fund balance has TABOR, a reserve policy on assigned fund balance. We feel in the past 14 years, even the economic downturn, the Great Recession, we just tap into unassigned fund balance. Jenny, you can correct me, without touching the reserve policy. So I feel with what's coming for 2023 and the following 24 months, we needed more probably flexibility with the unassigned fund balance to support probably one-time operating needs or additional CIP to provide us with a nimbleness to respond to the market. So we are more thinking based on a historical practice and the current, and just remember, our expenditures are increasing. So even you decrease the reserve policy from 16.7% to 12%, the dollar amount will probably still increasing. We are not decreasing the dollar amount, just percentage. So that's our recommendation, the logic behind our recommendation.
Can I ask another? That's very helpful, and I really appreciated you walking us through some of the history over the last decade or so, decade and a half of when we've needed to draw on more funds. And I believe this is correct. I don't believe we've actually touched our reserves in that time period. We always spent out of the fund balance. And I'm curious your perspective, the purpose of the reserves. If even in very difficult times we still never touched them, what is the point of having them? And is there a concern that the fund balance would grow to too large of an amount with no kind of policy or intention around it if we're never actually going to use reserves when we need them? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's why we feel that's a very good point. I feel when before we determine the reserve policy, the percentage, we need to talk about what are we going to do with the unassigned fund balance. We need to know we want to use new projects, new initiatives, new strategic plan, just one-time short-term the operating deficit. Once we know what we want, then we probably can better gauge what's the adequate percentage. That's why we feel based on our future needs, 12% is probably adequate. So I think before we determine the dollar amount, we need to determine what do we want to do with the excess.
Mayor Pro Tem, do you mind if I just piggyback on that answer? Because this is something that I'm trying to understand as well. But obviously, the reason for this conversation tonight, not only the fact that Mayor Pro Tem wanted to speak about just our budget and overall, but what is driving this? Is this just in past budget cycles that we realized that there should have been more that we could have done as a city operationally or in terms of capital, that we should have been looking at one of these 3 options, or at least the option 2 and option 3? Or is that's what I'm trying to gather here, is that it just seems that staff feels that maybe the unassigned fund balance is still way too high and that there's bigger priorities for the city to tackle?
I would say probably more council's directive for staff to revisit this topic, because it seems like we visit the topic every 2 years, 2016, then 2020. So it might be the time to revisit. Then when we are preparing for 2023 budget process, we're also thinking about 2023 and beyond, because with the current external factors, like the supply chain disruption, rebounding demand after COVID, and too much money chasing very limited goods and services. Those are external factors. And also internal factors, such internal management decision, council decision from EDDA, the property tax TIF, sales tax TIF, and our wage compression. So we're planning for 2023-2024. So the whole conversation started with the council directive. Then as the staff study more about the fund balance, and we're thinking, would this be a time to adjust the percentage?
Thank you, Director. Mayor Pro Tem.
I think there's another element of ratcheting and sliding that we haven't addressed yet here, and that is that one of the proposals that the Budget Advisory Committee put out in its report, which is attached to our packet tonight, is the idea that once we hit a reserve target, we only grow the unassigned fund balance by a certain percentage year over year. So we might automatically say we had $1 million surplus this year, half of that, or whatever number we assign for a growth cap, gets swept into operating the next year, or capital improvements the next year. In my opinion, a ballooning reserve is a sign that the city is doing one of two things wrong: either overtaxing its residents or failing to properly use their money. And so I want to make sure that one of my goals on council is to ensure that we plan for the future correctly, we use the money that the citizens give us effectively, and that we provide services at a level that can be sustained decade after decade. This is one of the methods that we have to do that. The growth that we have today won't continue forever. We know that based on economic trends of the past. The question is what we do when we reach a point where we no longer have that economic growth and security that we have now. I think this is a way to plan for that future downturn and to bring us into the next upturn cycle as well.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Good point. Member Woodward.
I feel comfortable with the ratcheting. I just don't feel comfortable with, well, I want to know where is that low number, the percentage. But the ratcheting, I don't have any problem with. I would support that.
Thank you, Member Woodward. Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is for Mayor Pro Tem Ward. Are you on the alternatives? The second alternative is a ratcheting and sliding type proposal. Are you happy with that suggestion specifically, with the lower bound being 8% and the upper bound being 12%? Is that the policy that you or the BAC would recommend, or do you see it as sufficiently close to that to be satisfactory?
I still adhere much more closely to the 16.7% number, just because the methodology used to derive that number is from the government accounting officer, whatever that name is. Sorry, I'm not a CPA, so the big acronym that talks about the government accounting eggheads, whoever they are. No offense. But that 16.7% or 2 months of reserves, I think, is a reasonable sort of middle. And then the question would be, where is the cap above that, where we begin pushing money into the next year's operating or capital improvement fund? And where is the limit on the bottom, where we start to say, okay, there's a red line here. We've lost revenue 2 years in a row, which I believe, if you look at past financial reports, two years of sustained revenue losses, the longest the city has gone year to year losing revenue. And then it tends to sit there at whatever the new reduced number is for a couple of years before it starts to grow back up again. So at that point, if you've lost revenue 2 years in a row, you need to start looking again. What's our head count? What programs can we afford? What programs can we no longer afford? Depending on how much is still left in the bank. So it's the part of this process that's awkward to me is when we have a year that doesn't meet financial expectations. Councils past have often made cuts in response to that. And my goal is continuity and stability of services. I don't want to say we had a bad year this year. It's time to reduce the hours at the rec center or the library or cut this parks program or reduce our headcount in the police department. Those things, those are discussions I feel like that's what the reserve is for, is to keep us operating at the same level for as long as possible until we realize that the economic model that we adopted 2 years ago is no longer sustainable now. And then we have to make changes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And do you mind if I just like piggyback on that? Because I think we just went through something similar just with the start of COVID, right? It's, obviously we passed the budget in in October of 2019. COVID starts March 2020. And obviously there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know really what's going on. So in that instance, when March happened, we put a lot of freezes in place, I guess, in a sense, right? We decided to stop hiring. We delayed projects or something along those lines. So even though we passed a budget, we are very malleable in terms of just like figuring out exactly what we want to do. I guess my point being that we're really quick to react when financial pressures or something happens nationally or worldwide where we're not going to fall insolvent because of decisions that we made as part of the previous budget, which to me kind of signifies why sliding and ratcheting is kind of like my preferred method, but we're really quick to react, I guess is my point. I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that, Steve, but...
Yeah, I think ratcheting and sliding, you kind of think of it as a sort of an ABS system in a car. If you're driving a car that doesn't have anti-lock brakes, you mash on the brake pedal and you lose traction, and who knows what's going to happen. But if you have anti-lock brakes, it's pumping the brakes for you. It actually lowers your stopping distance, and you have full control of the vehicle while you're doing this. That's the goal of ratcheting and sliding, is to say let's provide stability so that we don't have these herky-jerky movements in our expenditures and our revenues. We can plan for a flatter line and more controlled growth and shrinkage of city services, because people rely on the city of Englewood to provide them services. We do a lot of things here, and I want to be able to continue to provide those services, especially when there's higher demand, when there's been an economic downturn. And this allows us to plan for it. If I may, I'd like to address Member Woodward's question.
Actually, if you don't mind, since you do have the floor, Member Anderson, did that sufficiently answer your question?
Well, I guess I would just ask Mayor Pro Tem Ward, what would or do you see a lower bound on the sliding and an upper bound? What would those numbers be? And if you're suggesting a policy here for us, what are the numbers?
Yeah, that was the question that Member Woodward had. Okay. I would say on the lower end, Littleton's policy is probably workable. It's been proven workable in Littleton, and I think 8% was what they had. I'm comfortable with that. It's 1 month, and I would say any percentage we give should be the complete unallocated. What's the term that you used, Jackie? Unrestricted. So that would be exclusive of Tabor. So technically it would be 11%. I just think that Tabor Reserve is never going to get used, and if it does, I don't want to be here. So, that goal would be 11% total, 8% on top of the Tabor Reserve for the bottom. But ideally, if we're trending downward in our reserves, we're going to be making adjustments before we hit that 8%. We're going to see next year, it looks like we're going to be at 8% or below 8%. So again, smoother transitions as opposed to this sudden impact on city staff and residents.
Member Anderson, you good with that answer? Mayor Pro Tem, I'll pass it back to you, but I think you already answered that part of the question, but go ahead.
There is one question still remaining, which is what does the top? And I think the Budget Advisory Committee report did suggest a cap. Maybe we didn't come to consensus on that. Member Newcamp, do you happen to remember? I believe I had suggested 25, but with adjustments in how much gets allocated to the unassigned fund balance based on how far it is above. But at 25, you would say no more into the reserve. This is all going to be operating or capital.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Newcamp.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering if we have like an order of operations issue here, and I hear Mayor Pro Tem Ward say the purpose of reserves. And I think having a shared understanding of the purpose of our reserves would be really helpful in making this decision. And what Director Loh mentioned earlier, we need to decide what we want to do with the unassigned fund balance to ultimately decide what our reserves need to be and how we think about the unassigned fund balance, which I think there's still maybe a little bit of confusion or different understandings of what that balance is for. And I would like to come to some consensus around that so we can understand the purpose of what the reserves need to be. My understanding is that the unassigned fund balance has kind of acted as a cushion, for lack of a more professional word, for the city because we have yet to tap into our reserves even in times of great downturn. And so while I see the benefit of that, I also see through the historical data that the fund balance grows until there's a council who decides that they want to spend it. And I would like to see some more intention and strategy around what we do with the balance, not to make the city inflexible, but to be incredibly thoughtful and wise stewards of taxpayer resources. And I wonder if we can answer that a bit to help us determine what the right reserve policy is. Because I want to make sure that the reserves are meaningful in some way. And I'm curious, in your council communication, you note that the unassigned fund balance excess in the recommended 12% model could be appropriated for capital projects. That would be the same also if we kept it at 16.7, let's say, we didn't change the reserve policy at all, but we could add policy, almost a fourth option, correct? That would provide more policy around the unassigned fund balance itself. Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Anything else, Member Noonan-Kemp?
No, but I think maybe the Mayor Pro Tem has a response to some of the questions I'm asking about. I share his concern around letting the fund balance grow without strategy around it. But I just wonder what's the right direction to solve this problem? Is it from the reserve side or is it from the fund balance side?
Thank you, Member Noonan-Kemp. Mayor Pro Tem.
I like this question a lot. What is the purpose of reserves? To me, there's more than one purpose. The primary purpose of a reserve is stability. It provides security. It assures that we can continue to provide services even during times when revenue is reduced. That is the primary purpose of a reserve, in my opinion. Secondarily, it is a signal of the financial strength of the city to people who might be interested in securing debt when we go to draw debt. And then third, when there is a fairly sizable amount of cash in the bank, it does allow us to make quick decisions on things like property purchases or refurbishment of parks or other projects that are time sensitive that we might not otherwise have the opportunity to do. So those are what I see for the three purposes of the reserves.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Anderson.
I like Member Noonan-Camp's question about the reserve or the policy on unassigned fund, because these are really two separate policies, right? One for the reserve and one for the unassigned fund balance. And it seems to me that we should be expending those funds, transferring them into some fund where they could be useful for the city on an annual basis. And if we were doing that, then we wouldn't need to look at the unassigned fund balance as a cushion or something like that, which I don't think we should be anyway. That's what the reserve policy is for. So I would like to have some policy around that, and I think capital improvements funds is probably the right direction to go with that. We shouldn't be transferring the unassigned fund balance for operating expenses. That should be budgeted from our projected revenue as well. But if we did have that in place, then I do think the ratcheting and sliding thing makes sense. The concern I have, and this is because I don't have any experience, and maybe Member Woodward could speak to this, but what do we do when we're coming out of a recession, and how do we build back those reserves in a timely fashion, rather than just say, oh well, we had an extra $500,000 this year, I guess that increases it from 8% to 8 point whatever 9%. We need to build. I think we need to have some flexibility in that policy, especially for those times when we're coming out of a recession and need to build back up more rapidly to prepare for the next one. I don't know what effect this policy would have over a 6 or 7 year time frame after we tapped into and brought those reserves down to 8%. And so I don't know if that needs to be like if it needs to be built in as a mechanism, or if it's something that can be in policy as a discussion item for when you really look at it and go, what are the priorities this year? So I like the ratcheting and sliding, but maybe not for me with such a wide percentage band, because I think drawing all the way down to 8% would be, I'd be getting pretty nervous at that point. But drawing down to 10 or 11% or something like that makes a lot of sense. And then I don't know about going all the way up to 25%. I feel like maybe 19 or 20% would be fine. But then having a kind of a practice of how do we, or an idea of what the policy would look like for that rebuilding the reserves after we draw down to 10%. And then, of course, adding on to that, the policy around the unassigned fund balance. So that's kind of where I'm at on it.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Actually, Director Loh, a couple questions since it did come up here. One, going back to the city of Littleton, do we happen to know if they ever got down to 8% or 18%? Like, where do they normally sit in terms of percentage-wise in their unassigned fund balance, if we have that answer?
We do not know, because if you really read, they have this range at the end of the 5-year long range forecast.
Right.
So there is a deadline, not indefinitely. And also, if we want to adopt the ratcheting sliding methodology, if our assumption is if we have an economic prosperity, which means actual revenues exceed budget, that will probably be the case every year. So keep that in mind. If that's our definition, we will have to reach the maximum level anyway, because we have a prosperous year. So that's why if the council's fine with this assumption, as long as our actual revenues exceed the budget, we have a economic prosperity, and we are going to use the maximum percentage for reserve policy, then we can definitely implement. Right. But just keep that in mind.
And Director Loh, second question is, what impact does this have to our debt rating if we were to go down to 12% or the 8 to 18? I know that we've used our 16.7% to get a favorable interest rate in the past. So any impacts there for option 1 or 2?
Excellent question, because when we review the reserve policy for different cities, the question for myself is we need to consider other factors, not just percentage. What's their debt structure? What's their cash flow position? What's their diversification revenue? I think we need to see all those factors before we just adopt a number or adopt a policy. We do not know about their.
Thank you, Director Loh. Member Russell.
Thank you. So one of my questions is, we're required by law to have a balanced budget, correct? So how would that be impacted by all of this if we're changing things all the time?
Based on our finance policies, we need to present a structurally balanced budget. The definition is recurring revenues cover recurring expenditures. Last year, if you remember, we said we'll give council a balanced budget, but we were fortunate enough, we had a one-time revenue from the NEP, non-employee management balance $450,000 to balance our budget. So it's not a technically structurally balanced budget, but we had a balanced budget. But it doesn't mean we cannot tap into unassigned fund balance for short-term operating deficit. If you look at Littleton policy, I love the first sentence. The unassigned fund balance may be used to allow time for city to restructure its operations in a deliberate manner. So I don't think we need to be afraid of tapping into unassigned fund balance for short-term operating deficit for a specific purpose.
Well, and that's really the purpose of it, right? I mean, that's why it's a rainy day fund, the unassigned fund balance. But the way the policy's structured could limit us to whether we could do that or not.
If we
Our-
follow,
Is our current policy limiting us to using it as a rainy day fund?
I mean, unassigned fund balance
The
as a
unassigned,
rainy.
yes.
Um,
Well, that's 16.7%, right? Oh, the reserve policy.
the reserve policy.
Jackie, if I could interject, I would say no, it does not. And when we look at our, in the charter, a balanced budget per the charter is beginning fund balance plus revenues cannot exceed our expenditures. So we are not precluded from tapping into fund balance, or what we would tap into is that unrestricted reserve to balance our budget.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Noonan-Kemp.
Can you share with me your expertise based on my question earlier? How do you think we should be thinking about what the reserves are for the city and how we, when and if we should use them? And then also any thoughts you have about potential policy changes to the unassigned fund balance versus the reserves?
Yeah, thank you. That's what I mentioned. We want to know what's the purpose of the unassigned fund balance and reserve policy before we determine a dollar amount. And also we need to consider the future after COVID. So what we're planning to do on April 11th, the study session, we're going to go over the 2023 budget process with council. This presentation has two parts. One is we want to give council a framework and the current economic state. We need to consider the external factors, internal decision, how will they affect the 2023 and 2024. Then if we consider all those factors, we might have better idea what's the purpose of unassigned fund balance and a purpose and a reserve, or do we want to have a percentage for different purposes under the reserve policy or unassigned fund balance? But on the other hand, at the policy level, we don't want to make a lot of rules. Policy, we want to have the principle, not the rules. We can have rules in our process and procedure. So that's why we did not make this a little more complicated and hey, we can use percent, 2%, 20% for this purpose. But in conjunction this conversation, we do need to think about what we want to use with unassigned fund balance and a reserve without making this too rule-based.
Thank you, Director Loh. Mayor Pro Tem.
Just wanted to go back and revisit Member Russell's question regarding what we're required to do relative to the budget on an annual basis. The controlling law, as I see it, is Charter 83, Scope of Annual Budget, paragraph F. The budget shall contain a balance between the total estimated expenditures and total anticipated revenue from all sources, taking into account the estimated general fund cash surplus or deficit at the end of the current fiscal year. And it goes on from there, but essentially what that says to me, the way I interpret it, is the city can never have less than zero in the bank. So we have revenues, expenditures estimated in our budget, and then we have the surplus or deficit at the end of the year based on what we had in the bank at the start of the year.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Anderson.
So just thinking about the purposes of these funds, the reserve and the unassigned fund balance, maybe this is maybe just my naivety, or maybe, or at best my experience on council the last 2 years, but I've always thought of these two as the unassigned fund balance is for an economic downturn, or not, sorry, the reserve, the reserve is for an economic downturn, and the unassigned fund balance, at least the practice of the last couple of years, is for capital projects. Are there other categories I'm missing there that we should be thinking about, or is that kind of am I right on that? Is there general consensus on council that that's what these are for?
I would say yes, but I will also encourage council to think if we would use unassigned fund balance for short-term operating deficit. Would that be a consideration? Short-term. Yeah.
Thank you, Director. City Manager Lewis. Thank you, Mayor. And just want to add that I'm really happy to hear this conversation. I think it's an internal conversation we've had for quite some time, and we could really use council's direction on this. I think probably I would align more with Member Anderson's approach in terms of using unassigned fund balance or the unrestricted reserve, as it's being called, for capital. Insofar as if you look at the city historically, in the Cinderella City days when the city was flush with cash, instead of paving the streets with concrete and having 50 to 75-year streets, we just added 20 people to the Parks Department. I mean, we will be able to use any money that you give us for additional staff. But what can we do today to provide long-term economic sustainability and a really resilient infrastructure? Thank you, City Manager Lewis. Is it Member Newnenkamp or Member Woodward? I'll go to you, Member Woodward.
I just wanted to mention too, going back to the unrestricted reserve, that portion of it in past years was the later fund. I mean, that was the big number. And where did that come from? It came from River Point, the land we owned over there, the golf course where in order to do River Point, we received, I believe it was, I'm guessing right now, somewhere around $10 million, plus they remodeled the golf course. And then it came from Murph, which is McClellan, and the leases. And as the long-term asset reserve, in my mind, and I think the rest of council, and we went over this quite a bit when we started that fund, was that capital improvement portion of it to be utilized. And it seems to me, and Jenny probably remembers, but there were a time or two when council was so protective of that money that we actually said, okay, we can help fund this, but that's got to be paid back to the later fund. And so with now later using it for that capital, it's only a part of that bigger unrestricted reserve amount. So the other thing I want to mention is, comparing Englewood to Littleton, for example. Inglewood is a landlocked city. We're not expanding anywhere but up. That's the only way we can go. Everything else is developed. Littleton is still growing and growing, like the rest of the metro area. And I think that makes a difference. The larger the city, to compare our policy financially to Denver, they could have a major downturn, what we would consider a major downturn in revenue, wouldn't even affect Denver. It wouldn't affect them hardly at all. So I'm just thinking, the ratcheting idea I like this discussion. I just don't want to get too low in that number. The 16.7% does seem to me for a 16.7, 18%, something like that as a high end, where I feel comfortable that city council then could start directing money to PIF, I mean, public improvements, or those capital expenditures? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Woodward. And so what I'm hearing from you, Member Woodward, just to kind of like start concluding this portion of the agenda tonight, it sounds like you are in favor of the sliding and ratcheting methodology from a finance perspective, correct?
I am, but
just-
I'm not in favor of going all the way up to 25%. That's
Or maybe as low as 8%.
or as low as 8%.
Okay. Thank you, Member Woodward. Member Noonekamp.
To Member Anderson's question earlier about how we think about these funds, I agree that I think this council thinks about unassigned fund balance for capital projects, and the last council, which I think did great work appropriating a lot of money towards really needed projects. But I think to the city manager's point, not all councils have thought about it that way in the past, and we have no guarantee that future councils will think about it that way, which is my biggest concern right now. And so to Director Loh's point, I don't want to remove the flexibility or create too many rules if we did need some sort of short-term temporary operating expense support. But I would like, I think in tandem with my decision on this topic, a more clarified policy around either it's annually or something that we make a decision of what to do with that lump sum. And it would be capital directed either for immediate needs or something that we're kind of storing up for a project that we're saving for. But more clarity around that would help me make a more informed choice on this decision. To the mayor's question around kind of where I'm at, I would prefer a more conservative number. So I would prefer something on the higher end. I probably wouldn't want to do anything less than 10. I think that the best practice number is 16.7. I have no reason to move from that number. Continue to be open to ratchet and sliding, but my bigger concern is what we're doing with unassigned fund than the number where we're setting reserves.
Thank you, Member Noonekamp. And actually, to that point, it does sound like there needs to be a separate conversation from council in terms of just the policy around the reserve and the unassigned fund balance. Keep it flexible, but at the very least, provide a guideline for future councils if they're more fiscally conservative in that regard or less. So.
And if we're going to have another conversation on April 11th on some of those bigger questions, I wonder if this could come back with the feedback from tonight of a more holistic policy of unassigned and unrestricted together and how they work together. And, again, it just seems so odd to me that we've never tapped into reserves. And I almost wonder if having a large unassigned fund balance has kind of allowed us to not have to touch reserves, because that feels maybe a little bit scary. And I wonder if we say, no, reserves are for reserves and everything else is going to go to an actual need in the city, that it would maybe force a little bit more care around when we go into overages and when we tap into that balance.
Right. And Member Noonekamp, unrestricted, same as reserve. Am I understanding that correctly or no?
No, unrestricted fund balance is after reserve. Let me show
Okay.
you this presentation.
That's
We're
one of the
throwing a lot of
challenges.
terms here,
Yeah.
so
Is
yeah.
terminology.
Right.
So I've been kind of loosely referring to whatever we have in the bank at the end of the year that we haven't assigned to the budget as reserves, but it's technically unassigned, unrestricted, and reserve. Yeah, Director Loh.
Member Noonekamp.
I was going to say, my apologies if I'm using the wrong terminology and getting caught in the alphabet soup, but reserves versus everything else.
Okay, we need to standardize the terminology as well. Mayor Pro Tem, I'll pick it to you. Well, I know where you stand in terms of sliding and ratcheting, so.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we need to be careful about, though, is that consistently increasing reserve may be actually a sign that it's a good time for some growth in city services. We're about to have another conversation about that later this evening. Is now a good time for us to see growth in city services. And the sticky part there is that when we do grow the size of our city government, we need to sustain that year after year after year, as opposed to capital, which is, hey, we're going to spend this year and then the money's gone, but we have this object for the next 20 or 30 or 50 years or however long.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Anderson.
Yeah, I was just. Are you looking for like feedback at this point on?
I think
the
I think we're
percentages?
now at the point where if you're
Okay.
ready to provide feedback to or direction to staff.
Okay,
on what
I
we're
like.
saying.
I like the ratcheting and sliding in tandem with a policy that allows that unrestricted. Wait, unassigned.
About unassigned fund balance and unrestricted reserve policy around these two line items, right?
Yeah. Oh, unrestricted reserve is the 16.7% that we're currently.
Correct.
Right. Okay, so the unassigned fund balance, having a policy around that to generally direct it towards capital projects in tandem with a ratcheting and sliding that centers at 16.7 but extends an equal percentage up and down from that to 10.5 and whatever the difference is, somewhere in that range. That's ballpark is kind of what I'm comfortable with.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Member Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. And I tend to agree with Councilmember Noonan-Kemp on this. I think that I would like to move forward with a discussion on April 11th in conjunction with this topic. How high did the unrestricted reserves get before council spent like $9 million for different things? Did it get up close to 25%?
Yeah, let's take a look at this slide.
According to the 2020 budget, we were at 46.35.
46.3 in the 2020 budget?
Yep.
Did any of that have to do with the COVID funds?
It did, because I mean, we were very conservative.
Because we would have never had that much money. So what happened in 2019? What was it?
I have written down 33.52%.
Okay, so it was over 25, but I think I'm open for a discussion to dealing with that. However, I will tell you that we got a lot of things done because of that excess amount, not counting the COVID year, but even before that. There were things with the stormwater that we were able to do. And so I think that we need to be careful about, because we can nickel and dime it to death on things that we can get out of the budget anyway. And most of the capital projects that are, when we have a substantial amount, it can make a dent in those things. So I would just like to have that discussion on the 11th and get some more clarity on how things are. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Russell. I too am in agreement with discussing further on April 11th. I'm also in favor of the ratcheting and the sliding, although sliding and ratcheting seems to slide off out of my mouth a lot easier. But I would be in agreement with that. But I do believe that those percentages need to narrow. Member Wink, Member Woodward, anybody else want to chime? Well, Member Woodward, you already chimed in. Member Wink, did you want to chime in? I think we're set. Director Loh, is that enough direction from council?
Yes. On the 11th, we'll also talk about our assumptions for around revenue expenditures. So we want to consider everything concurrently, so council does not make isolated decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director Loh and Budget Administrator Nolan, for the presentation tonight and the dialogue. Really appreciate it. I think we're up for another break. So 5-minute break, 10-minute break. Anybody have a preference? 5? 5 works. So let's go up until about 7:45 and we'll readjourn then. Thanks. Members of council, excuse me, I think we're ready to begin. Chief, do you have your team here ready to go?
I do. Thank you. We're all
right.
set.
Perfect. So good. Moving on to agenda item 3, so community safety report. We have the chief here, Sam Watson, with his entire team, deputy chief, a few division chiefs. I'll let you introduce your team, but here to discuss community safety report. Thank you, chief.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Just for a quick introduction, myself, Sam Watson, police chief, have Deputy Chief Vance Fender, Division Chiefs Chad Reed, Tracy Jones and David LeClair, Sergeant Reed McGrath. I thought it was very important to have the team here and be prepared to answer any questions and engage in the conversation as it develops. Also, Sergeant Lutz is back here. He's the impact team sergeant, and Dirk, is Dirk still here? Dirk Smith was here. He's the EPBA president of the EPBA Officers Association. So I believe he might walk back in.
Yeah, we definitely noticed Dirk earlier. So
yeah.
Thank you very much, Chief. Looking forward. Go ahead.
Definitely a team approach, and one of the many unique opportunities I have had as a chief is the ability to look at all of the PD related programs and projects and evaluate each individual work group within the department, looking for efficiencies, looking at how we do things, if we can do things better, if we can do things more efficient, all in the quest for the delivery of our services. As part of that, I meet with all the employees, engaging all the employees, talking to them about challenges and things we can do internally within our department to improve on those, engaging them in the problem solving as well. And it was really a unique opportunity for me when I first came in to do this. And part of that was to meet with the employee associations, members of the employee associations. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about is feedback that I've heard from them as well. So we've incorporated a lot of that into the presentation. As you will see, maybe you've had a chance to cruise the PowerPoint before we got to it. There's information on updated crime statistics that we've included the 2021 data for. The last time you saw this was 2020 data. There's a comparison between cities and from year to year that you'll see. There's information on citizen expectations of the police department. We have lots of information on alternative policing programs, not just the ones that we have now, but programs that we're developing. So you'll hear information on that. You'll hear information on challenges that we have within the police department, both for sworn and non-sworn members of the department. We'll talk about some strategies for the PD as we move forward. There's requests that we have, resource requests that came up at the last presentation that I gave here. I thought it was important, and talk about needs that we have from City Council. But most importantly, it's an opportunity for us as the staff of the police department to engage with you all on this conversation. So I just wanted to introduce that topic. First off, as we know, we have the thanks, Vance. Which one is it? The one that's all worn out. Yeah. Is the 2020 Citizen Survey, which there's multiple guiding documents, but obviously this is one of them. And just to highlight a couple points on there, and one is that the meaning of safety for the community and the importance of that, and the focus for the next 2 years. That second bullet point on safety is a high priority there. The also the areas for improvement, crime prevention, overall feeling of safety, and then the last bullet point. So as we develop this presentation and as we talk, I always want to come back to the community expectations. What do they want out of law enforcement? What are they looking for? And what we can do as a police department then to meet those expectations. So let's talk about some data.
Good evening, Council. So, like the Chief said, we're going to go over some crime trend numbers, and we'll go over some of these and kind of explain some of them as we go. So the first one is total calls for service. And just to explain, total calls for service are everything that are either a citizen or are a reporting person generated to officer initiated acts. These are all calls that directly relate to police involvement or require some sort of police service. And as you can see, we ended 2021 with about 55,000 calls for service that were generated that needed some sort of police involvement or required service, whether it was a phone report, an officer initiated act, or an officer that had to respond to a call for service. What we're getting into now are what are called Group A offenses, and that's how offenses are reported to the FBI by every police agency in the state. And there's three different levels of crimes. One's crimes against persons, the other one against property, and the other one against society. And we'll speak to those separately because there's 24 different offense categories in each of those. So we'll discuss some of those in more detail. But as you can see, we did follow not only the national trends, but also the Colorado trends. I just read a report today, as a matter of fact, that was put out that the statewide crime was up across the board in persons, property, and society. And it only went down in three categories, which were burglary, arson, and prostitution. They said burglary probably went down because so many people were home last year, and that was the rationale for that. But across the board, everything went up throughout the state of Colorado. The first one we'll talk about is the first one of the three is crimes against persons. And as you can see, you'll see the Greenwood Village did not report in 2021, and we're not really quite sure what that was about. But there are no crime stats from Greenwood Village, but we have compared us to Greenwood in the past. So, but as you can see, everybody went up even a little bit. Littleton went up a little bit, but everybody went up in crimes against persons, other than Wheat Ridge, which went down. That is also a nationwide and a state trend where crimes against persons did go up in 2021. And crimes against persons, I'm sorry, most of those are assaults. Obviously, that includes murder, kidnapping, any sort of sexual assault, but assaults are the big generator of persons crimes.
Can I interrupt real
Sure.
quick? Thank you. Commander Fender or Deputy Chief, sorry. Are these population adjusted? So are we comparing apples to apples here in terms of population?
That is a great question. No, you can't. The only one that's closest to us, realistically, Northglenn and Wheat Ridge are the two closest to us in population. But it's very tough to do that because of, pardon me, density. It's hard to do because of how large or small some of the cities are. Littleton's land base is gigantic compared to our 6.89 square miles, although they have a few more citizens. So definitely not apples to apples, but the closest we can look
Okay,
at.
thank you.
So the next one is crimes against property, and in crimes against property, that is overwhelmingly driven by thefts. It is arsons, burglary, damage to property, which is criminal mischief, and then thefts, which also include motor vehicle thefts. Again, nation, statewide trend, property crimes went up across the board. As a matter of fact, in Colorado, motor vehicle thefts were up 32% between 2020 and 2021. So motor vehicle thefts were very high across the board in the state of Colorado. Last is crimes against society. And crimes against society are drug offenses, pardon me, weapons offenses, prostitution, and animal cruelty, just to name a few. You can see that our crimes against society number went down compared to Commerce City, which went way up. Wheat Ridge was up. Northglenn and Littleton were down just a little bit. One of the reasons I think you can look at that is some of the drug offenses we'll talk about here later in the presentation. We had a lot of our drug offenses in the state of Colorado that were taken felonies to misdemeanors, and that made a big difference in that as well. Last is a crime rate slide, and the state of Colorado and the FBI does crime rates per capita. You can see the numbers are very large because they do it per 100,000 population. That's how they do it across the board, even though we only have about 36,000 people. What this means in our world is that the way these crimes are reported is it's not one offense that's reported. It's several offenses could be reported in one crime. For example, an arson could also include criminal mischief, or a first-degree criminal trespass could include a theft. So sometimes there's 2 or 3 or even 4 different crimes that are reported in one incident. And so the more crimes that you report in that incident, the more those numbers get, I guess, elevated. Last year, I think we looked, and Wheat Ridge was just above us in 2020's presentation that we did, and this year we're just above Wheat Ridge, which really isn't surprising. Traditionally, we've been on the higher end of a lot of the crimes crimes per capita, and I use air quotes in that numbers, but it's a very deceiving way to report crimes as crimes per capita, but that's how the state does it. Last for now from me, we also did something we didn't do last year, and we were able to look into the residency of people that we physically arrested or issued a criminal summons to. And this does not include traffic tickets or traffic offenses. This just includes physical arrest or people that were issued a criminal summons. We were able to determine that 47% of the people reported that they were residents of the city of Englewood. 32% reported that they were not residents of Englewood, and the 21% of unknown were either people experiencing homelessness, people that some folks, you're not required to put down an address. If we arrest you, you can go into jail with no physical address. You can actually get a summons with no physical address, or some addresses that perhaps RMS didn't recognize or record management system didn't recognize. So that number is kind of a moving target, but about 21% we just don't know. And I'll be passing this over to Dave LeClair.
Good evening. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and discuss some policing strategies on the next slide. There we go. Just want to touch on that our organizational philosophy is heavily influenced, first and foremost, by the community needs. We also look at crime trends and data analysis, and we really focus on best practices and industry standards that are being used in the policing industry. we use these points to really drive our resources with the intent to enhance community safety, reduce crime, and improve the quality of life. To go a little deeper into that, one of the tactics or implementations that we use is special teams, where they utilize this data-driven analysis in what we collect, and these special teams are deployed geographically throughout the city. In the next couple slides, you'll see some maps that really kind of show where our crime rates fall, and that this is how we deploy our teams to it. These specialized teams. We also back up these specialized teams with our patrol division when they have what we call available time, or where they're not allocated to answering a call for service. And these teams work collaboratively with each other to address the crime needs the best that they can.
And I'll go over the heat maps for you. So we had the heat maps made up, and you can tell pretty quickly where the issues are. So this map is on crimes against persons, and so you can see that it's got 6 different areas that look to be hot spots for crimes against persons. The largest one being around the area of the hospital district east of Broadway and around the 285 corridor. And looking at that, we discussed that as a team, and a lot of these crimes against persons are mandatory reporting elder abuse cases that we're looking at that. And we do have a very heavy concentration of retirement homes and rehabilitation homes and centers around the hospital district, which would explain a lot of that because of the mandatory reporting that has to be done. You can also see that around 285 and Broadway, and then again the kind of the corridor between Broadway and Santa Fe and 285 and Floyd look to also have a fairly high concentration of crimes against persons. And then as you go south in the city, you can see there's also a concentration on South Broadway down towards Tufts, and then again where the apartments are down near Broadway and Bellevue. And you can see another one, a big one there, right there where the apartment complex is on East Girard. And so that would fit there. Crimes against property, again, are your thefts, mostly your motor vehicle thefts. You can see a very heavy concentration of crimes against property here at between 285 and Floyd again, and then Broadway and Santa Fe again, which would make sense with shoplifts from Walmart. It would make sense with the high retail there with the property crimes, as well as criminal mischiefs like we talked about, and motor vehicle thefts. And you can see that crime map also goes a little bit to the east on 285, and then of course the entire Broadway corridor just does have that density. And then a little bit down here in what we call Lower District 3 along South Federal Boulevard. And the last hotspot map, and then you'll be done hearing from me for a little while. Crimes against society, and the societal crimes are the crimes that include drug offenses mostly, some weapons offenses, and you can see again our hotspot right here is like Broadway and 285, and then again all the way towards Santa Fe, and again Floyd, and then 285 on the south side. And then a little bit around here, this is just along 285, and then this is Logan right down here. So you can see where that is mostly populated. And so just based on some of those heat maps, that's where we end up deploying some of our resources.
So one of those resources is the impact team, and with Sergeant McGrath taking over his new position now, we have Sergeant Eric Lutz, who's here with us. He will be leading the team moving forward. Part of his assignment is to work closely with our crime analysts to identify hotspot locations and other problem areas. We'll use this team basically to go in, and they have the time and the resources to dedicate to dealing with these problems that pop up throughout the city.
Another one of our teams is our zone policing program. This falls under my division, the patrol division. This is made up of 2 officers. They work as partners, same side of the week, so they work Monday through Friday, same hours. And their main focus is the Civic Center area, so north of 285, west of Broadway, south of Floyd, and east of Santa Fe, to give you just a bit of a geographical eyesight on that. But they partner with businesses in the area to address high quality of life issues, high crime locations, and partnerships. And one of the main reasons why they are so successful is because of the high visibility. Even though it falls under the patrol division, they have different uniforms than patrol officers, so they're very, very easily identifiable out there.
And again, we're looking at the co-responder program. We're moving into our right close to our 4th year with this program. These professional mental health workers have been huge in our success. Without them, it would require 1, potentially 2 officers taken off of the street to deal with the mental health issues. So now that we have them, we have the professionals stepping in to take those roles, which allows our officers to be more proactive out on the street and have that high visibility that the community wants to see. In addition, we also have the homeless case manager that's out there with them working as well, providing resources, making those contacts to help those experiencing homelessness.
And our traffic team, this is made up of 3 officers. 2 officers are on motorcycles. 1 officer is in a vehicle. Again, these officers stagger throughout the week, so there's coverage Monday through Friday. And we focus on education, engineering, and enforcement at high accident locations, school zones, and highly identified traffic problem areas in the city. You're good there. Our community relations crime prevention specialist is a position that we've been trying to fill for some time, and I'm happy to announce that our specialist started today, actually. But this is what they're tasked with, and to continue building this program is something that we're very excited for. And kind of the key points from this is the CEPTED, if you're not familiar with that, is crime prevention through environmental design, and working with businesses and residences to really decrease their likelihood of being victimized. Also, organizing programs and activities that build positive relationships between the PD and the community, and I think that's we can all agree that that's very important. And then, probably most importantly in my book is public education and outreach, which lowers property crime incidents. It's working with the community and really focusing on that in a way that it kind of increases our abilities. Next. These strategies, and the chief spoke about this when he kind of led us into this, but that we have strategies that are in place now, and these would be those strategies that we have really already enacted and we're going to continue to develop. Some of the key points in here is the enhancement of the restorative justice program, which is an alternative policing practice that is proving successful. Another would be really kind of bolstering our professional standards bureau and looking at hiring just quality employees, recruiting and training our officers so that they're the best that there is out there, and provide the community with the best possible resources. And another heavy lift that we're happy to say is completely in place is the body-worn camera. We are fully up and running on that, and is really helps with transparency and accountability.
The programs that we just discussed, obviously they're dependent on staffing, and many of them, traffic, impact, zone, we've drawn back on the staffing in there to supplement patrol. We have vacancies, we have openings, we have officers that have been injured, that are hurt. So we've had to reduce the size of those units, bring them back into patrol for minimum staffing. We have levels of staffing that's critical for us to maintain for safety of the community and safety for the officers. So our hope is when we get back to fully staffed, then we can return these officers back into their special assignments, so the full effectiveness. So those are current programs that we have in place, alternative policing programs, although the community relations program is is back new for us. We're excited for that. So now we're going to talk about some newer programs that are being developed that will have a positive impact. The 911 call diversion, mobile crisis response unit, and the call for service evaluation study. And I believe Reed's going to take the first one.
You bet. We're really excited to move into crisis call diversion. We'll be doing some pretty significant training this month. And on May 2nd, this program is slated to go live. We're going to be the first agency in Colorado to partner with Rocky Mountain Crisis Partners in transferring screened crisis calls to the crisis line. So the calls that will go to them will involve calls that don't involve public safety or the breaking of laws. We're really confident that people will get better response and treatment for their mental health or substance abuse issues from trained clinicians than from sending police officers. There will still be occasions when police officers will need to respond, but this program should help with that. Rocky Mountain does the telephonic support for these things, and they have some follow-up that they do with people. They call people back when it's a simple call, and on more complex calls, they're able to dispatch what's called SAFI. It's a mobile response group. It's funded all by the state of Colorado. Not as good as our co-responders, but it is good because it's 24/7, 365. So it essentially gives us a more robust 24/7 response to meeting mental health needs in the community. Another program that's coming is, I need to switch the slide, sorry about that, is our mobile crisis response. This is entirely an all health program built by them, funded by them. We're working with them in terms of the development of it. We're hoping it's going to start July 1st. It's going to be a pilot project in Englewood. It will be eventually moving into Littleton first, and then into Sheridan as we're able to scale this program. But we've got to get it going here first to see how it will work. It's going to be staffed by a non-licensed clinician and a medical person somewhere along the lines of probably an RN or a paramedic. That person's not been hired. The case manager version of this person has been hired. She's currently training with All Health and with us. She's coming in for weeks at a time with us to learn the system, the resources, and things like that. This van you see is the actual van. It's going to be way converted. It'll be able to do some transports for us, so we're really excited about that. If you have heard of the STAR program in Denver, this is similar to that. The Denver program leans a little bit more on clinicians. There's a program out of Eugene, Oregon called Cahoots. You've probably heard of. That's kind of where all this started from. There's about 100 different variations around the country of this program. This program is going to respond to some of our less acute calls for service. We get a lot of calls for welfare checks of just homeless people, man down, not needing immediate medical attention, intoxicated people that don't need immediate attention, minor trespassers, like there's someone I don't want here, sleeping on my front step, on my porch, on my business. This unit has the ability to resource as far as elders in terms of giving them some resources or working with them to get them to needed services. They can do some mental health calls when a co-responder is not available. They're available at the request of officers, and they're just going to go on calls where there's not a threat of violence. And the goal of this program is really to reduce the police response and interaction, the forced interaction with people that don't need a response from law enforcement. So in terms of council things, this is going to be a process of getting this going. We're going to have an MOU with All Health, and as we roll this into other cities, it's going to require some IGAs with Littleton, because we're going to be dispatching this program out of Englewood, and then with Sheridan, and they're dispatched through Arapahoe County. So we have a ways to go before it gets fully functional in the Tri-Cities area, but we are heading there.
So somewhat on a similar line of thinking, this is not an official program yet, but we've looked at a call for service evaluation. And I'm going to read the goal verbatim because I think it's important. We want to look at varying approaches to historical calls for service from police by evaluating certain aspects of a call that could lead to a reduction in forced police encounters. And I'll provide some examples for this. Bias-motivated calls for service. Somebody's in my neighborhood. I don't have any other reason to believe that they're suspicious other than I just have never seen this person before. Again, that would be the only information that the dispatcher had. Unwanted, unhoused individuals that there's not necessarily a crime component to the call for service. It's just simply a person that is unhoused, that is maybe in the area of a business or a residence. And lastly, calls that do not have enough information to force that police encounter. Again, we're looking at these calls for service through a very, very different lens. This is highly managed by the shift sergeant or supervisor. When the call comes in, the officer has the ability to look at this through a different lens, but again, there's an oversight by the shift supervisor on this. And the result of this is a reduction in calls for service that have potential to escalate where there is no reason for contact. Again, we're looking at this through a different lens, but ultimately this allows our officers to focus on stratified policing objectives, hotspot problem area locations. Our next step is to codify this in some respect to the organizational philosophy, the community philosophy, and the goal for this is to identify calls for service. So what are we dealing with? What type of call for service is this? We want to evaluate what are the officer's options? What options does the officer have? Is the officer going to respond? Is the officer going to respond and respond from a distance and then make a decision to engage with the person? And what does that response look like? We will contact the reporting party if they want contact. We don't necessarily contact everybody. If they don't want contact from an officer, then we would not. We could have a phone call or a conversation to explain why the officer did or did not contact the source of the complaint.
So, as Deputy Chief Fender said earlier, lawmakers have pretty much reduced most drugs down from felonies to misdemeanors. So it's frustrating for the community when we show up and all we can do is basically write a summons and kick them down the road. If you look at property crime, somebody breaks in your car and steals something out of your car. Okay, well, at best we can do is write them a ticket now. In some certain cases, we can jail a person, but typically that's not what would happen. So given an opportunity, I would ask that the council at some point could work with the municipal league and get them to work with the lawmakers downtown, and see if we can get some of these laws changed. I mean, not only do law enforcement get this information, the criminals themselves, they know what amount of drugs to carry, which amount not to carry, which classifies that as a misdemeanor. So, I mean, they're willing to take a misdemeanor, but they don't want the felony. So they know as well. So, that doesn't detract from what we're going to do as a police department. We're going to provide that high quality service that the community expects of us. But in some of these cases, we'll have to go in and we'll have to educate them, and hopefully they can understand why we're doing what we're doing.
There's other legislative influences as well that have affects law enforcement. The Colorado Senate Bill 217 and back in 2020, and then 1250 has changed the face of law enforcement. It's changed a lot of the direction, and some people will say it's provided made a chilling effect due to the loss of qualified immunity for police officers. Some of you may have followed that story. There's there's a thought out there within law enforcement on the risk versus reward. Some of the examples that were given by Division Chief Reed and Jones on the non-criminal consensual contacts, the high risk for personal liability and for organizational liability. First Amendment auditors may be an example of those, and just the decisions to contact or not contact for non-criminal reasons is out there. There's also within those Senate bills the uncertainty, the undefined threshold of reasonableness standard. So the law, as we know, is based a lot on the reasonableness standard, and there's objectively reasonable police officer conduct that's being reviewed at a reasonableness that's outside of law enforcement, and it's really undefined on the effect that has on law enforcement. Now, since these have been passed in 2020 and 2021, there's the development of case law and case studies. So we in law enforcement are kind of starting to get a handle on those activities within law enforcement that pose that risk to an individual officer, personal liability risk, not the physical risk, which is real as well and significant, but the liability risk is. So again, the responding to unwanted people, when we have an RP or a victim that's unwilling to prosecute, shoplifter is a good example of that. Is they would call and we'd get in foot chases and maybe have a use of force at the end of a foot chase, and then we go back to the business and they don't want to prosecute. So what are we doing in law enforcement, forcing that interaction and having that use of force, and the dangers that pose. The impact of from the DA's office and the prosecutor's office on what will be prosecuted and what won't be prosecuted, given how the judges rule, the issue of the jail criteria that we talked about as well on their acceptance. Although since the last time I was here, that has changed twice, I believe. So included in your packet is the most recent memo, just to update you from my previous on the jail acceptance, and all those come into play, as well as within those Senate bills are the additional requirements on law enforcement relative to administrative duties, reporting, RMS reporting, body worn cameras, citizen contact cards. All that has put additional requirement on police officers' time as they process a call for service. Now you couple that with the dangers of law enforcement, just the profession itself, and we've talked about the personal liability, but the personal safety is real as well. The nature of the calls that the officers are going on in Inglewood, I can speak to. But it's a national trend. But I can speak to Inglewood. It's significant. The danger to the police officers. What used to be perhaps one officer responding to a call, now we have to send multiple officers to that call for safety of the community and safety of the officers. So the nature of these calls has changed dramatically, and so for all those reasons, that's been brought on by these Senate bills, and again, I just wanted to put that out there, if I could. Just as an overview, we're going to talk about resources here in a second. So this is a kind of a backdrop on over the years of program enhancements within the police department, and so you've seen those most recent for our current year that was approved for last year. Our current year is the Community Relations Crime Prevention Specialist. We talked about the addition of a parking management officer, which will start in a week. The proactive hiring plan, which are the 2 academy positions. So those were 2022 enhancements. Our ability to implement policing strategies and be effective in the community is impacted in a variety of ways. The legislative changes we talked about, the RMS, which is the records management system reporting requirements, body worn cameras, the nature of the calls for service that I mentioned earlier, the safety requirements, the community's expectations. So again, I opened up this dialogue us doing what we can to identify and meet those expectations of the community. Some of those certainly speak to being effective at high crime areas, hot spots, high call for service, special needs area. There's also a component of visibility that I hear in the community that I've heard from members of council as well, of increasing our visibility. And when the officers don't have free or available time because they're tied up on administrative tasks or the amount of time it takes for them to process a call for service, it reduces their amount of time where they can be proactive and patrol the hot spots and be visible within the community. So I was asked the last time I was here on resources that we need within the police department. I should say that the community needs, and at the time we were still developing those, because I was still doing those evaluation studies, those efficiency studies. I had yet to meet with the city manager on this, and so here is this. Now I understand the bottom line impact is extremely significant. So this is, even though I have the numbers in there, which is appropriate, it's the ask was formulated initially outside of the dollar value. I just wanted to say, what do we need? And let's start with there. So the two desk officers are civilian positions, and they're a force multiplier. So if they can take some of the calls that traditionally a police officer would have to take, either come to the station or do a phone report, it's a force multiplier, because then that officer can be out on the street more. The assist to the AV tech, that's a result of the body worn cameras, the audio visual needs there. The 6 additional police officers. So if we want to increase the presence of 1 police officer on the street at any given time, that takes 6 people. So the increase of 1 to be felt by the community means we have to bring 6 people on. So we have the 3 different shifts: day shift, swing shift, and watch 3, the graveyard shift, to get an officer on each shift. And then that officer has days off, so we have to have an additional one on that same shift for days off. That still doesn't take into effect PTO days or training or sick time or injuries. And so some people will say, in order to feel that presence of 1, you need more like 7 or 8 people. But I'll just start with 6 on this presentation. And that also gives not only the higher visibility, but it gives more attention to the hot spots and crime areas that we talked about. And then that last position you'll see looks familiar to most of you, because that was an enhancement that we put in for this year that didn't get approved. So we're asking for it again. That's very important, because I don't want to just talk about the impact of all this on sworn police officers, because there's an impact on dispatch, on records, on code enforcement, all the civilian positions as well. And for dispatch, the impact of call diversion, of 911, of the mental health ingredient, of the mobile response unit, that's all going to be felt in dispatch. So by bringing on another supervisor, that would allow 1 more person at the console, and our communication manager is now morphed into more of a project manager and a program manager, and less of a supervisor. There's I wanted to talk a little bit about the different formulas, or the different ideas on what a properly staffed police department looks like. And there's the important part on making that is twofold. One, making that decision is twofold. One is the crime rate. What's the call for service rate? What's the crime rate? What are the officers experiencing? What type of calls are they going to? Is it a 1-person call or 2-person call? And then another part of that is, what are the community's expectations? What types of calls does the community expect the law enforcement agency, our police department, to respond to? Some departments that have fewer people per 1,000 don't respond to the same amount of calls or the same types of calls that we do. They don't do the same kind of follow-up. So what what does the community want? What are their expectations for rapid response? How long it takes a police officer to get there. Those all come into play. There's old, don't want to call them old, there's what I believe are antiquated formulas on the officers per 1,000. Some of you may have heard that before, the 2 officer per 1,000 formula, and that does not take into account crime rate, community's expectations, and those. I personally, I don't believe that that's a proper way of looking at staffing, but it's out there, and you may have heard of it. So I thought I would talk about that. So if we want to have an immediate impact and a sustainable impact on the crime rate, which we talked about the stats, on the visibility ingredient, on the service that we're delivering to the community, this is what I feel that we need. Now on the next slide, we'll talk about some alternatives to this, but this is what I feel moment in time is important. And as we move forward, even as we're enhancing the alternative policing programs that we talked about, and as we're bringing on the new alternative policing programs and projects that we've talked about, hopefully those will chip away somewhat at the calls for service and allow our officers to be more proactive. Introducing the desk officers will assist in that. But even with that, the requirements that we have for the police officers, the workload that they have, the types of calls that they go on, the safety ingredient, those aren't going away. Those are still real. So for those reasons, this is why we put together this resource ask. So there's a couple other ways of looking at the same issue. One is, how do we engage the community to help us with this problem as well? So this is one of the busiest slides I've ever seen. I've worked with the city manager on this as well. They're all very important, but just to highlight a couple of these, what we ask for the community is to understand the importance of the alternative policing strategies. Is when we talk about call diversion and call for service evaluation and mobile response unit, that the community understands the positive impact that has, and the benefit to the individuals, the benefit to the problem, as well as the overall response of the police department and their efficiencies. The importance of alternatives also to include call prioritization. They may have to wait because their call is a lesser priority when we have 5 or 6 calls stacked waiting for a police officer to respond to, and we only have 1 or 2 in service. Obviously, we have to prioritize those as they come. And but if you're the person waiting for that police response, it's frustrating. So there's a level of understanding, and then the different options that might be inherent with online reporting, like Division Chief Reed said. Not everybody wants a police officer at their front door. Some physically actually don't want a police officer to show up. They want to report something, but they don't want to see their neighbor or the source of the concern see the police officer come to their house, and then that same police officer goes and contacts them. So some of them like the phone reporting or the online reporting. We also asked, the bottom bullet on the left, that the community recognize that homelessness is not synonymous with crime. There's a lot of calls for service that we get that aren't criminal. It's unwanted. It's outside the what that person feels is the norm, and they don't know what to do. So who do they call? Call us. They call the police department. So there's a level of understanding there. When we talk about crime prevention through environmental design, that's a big topic for the community. That there's programs out there to reduce people's ability to be victimized. Like Deputy Chief Fender said, the property crimes, that's probably the one crime that people can have an effect on by themselves, to be less of a victim. And some of that is lighting, it's environmental design, it's protecting their own property, bringing their bikes in from the yard, closing their garage, not leaving their purse on their car seat, locking their doors, just protecting their own property. It's crimes of opportunity that has caused that to rise. So there's other things that go along with that. There's programs on gunshot reduction systems that you've probably heard about that can help with rapid response. There's surveillance cameras that can be installed to look at high crime areas. Now, keep in mind those are surveillance, and those are better. I was about to say more better, but that wouldn't have worked. Those are better for solving a crime, not necessarily to prevent a crime, but they do act as a deterrent. There's civilian patrol programs that are out there putting cars out there in the communities that are having problems, and there's also private security partnerships sourcing this out to private security companies, and we have private security around the EVE property. The Civic Center is one example of that. So again, this is a busy slide, but this is again what we're asking for from the community. And I just want to end. I think we're over on time. Sorry, sir. I want to leave you again, kind of where we started with the intended purpose of this presentation is to do what we can to allow officers to meet the expectations of the community, identify and meet those expectations, with being proactive at problem areas, hot spots, high crime areas, being more visible, reduction in crime and the fear of crime is extremely important. And then lastly is to bring the patrol and staffing schedule. It's not all patrol again, but the staffing schedule in a way that right now, because we're short, the demands that we have for police officers, the safety ingredient, it's really difficult. It's hard for officers to get time off. It's hard for them to go to training. People are getting overtime shoved on them, mandated overtime to fill shifts, to fill minimum staffing. If an officer wants to take the night off to have dinner with his wife, they can't, because it would take us below minimum staffing, and it's a demoralizing impact as well for the officers. And it's not just the patrol officers; this includes detectives and other work groups as well. So it's something that we talk about internally, and I just wanted to bring that to your attention as well. That it's important for the employee base. So I think that was a lot of information at a short amount of time, and we're here to answer any questions or engage in conversation. Thank you.
Chief, thank you so much. Thank you to you and to your leadership for, honestly, just like an honest reflection of what you guys are dealing with, and I'm sure it stirred a lot of questions for our council. So anybody want to lead us off? Member Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief, and the entire team for coming to present this. It was really helpful information. My question is around staffing. How many officers short are you right now that have been budgeted and we have the money for, you just haven't hired for?
We have our authorized strength is 78 sworn police officers. The total strength within the police department is 115, but that includes civilian positions, dispatcher, records, support staff. So right now we have 4 officers in training, scheduled to be out within 3 to 4 months. They start different, and then we're 4 positions down that we're testing for. So I will say these vacancies have occurred through attrition, and our turnover rate is relatively low compared to other police departments. I think that's important to know. Yet there are some officers that are leaving, not to go to other police departments, but go to other industries or different professions other than law enforcement. And we've had some retirements as well.
So you're down 8. Those numbers add together, you're down 8 total.
Well, the schedule is down 8.
Right.
Our staffing is 4 police
Right, you have
sworn
4
officers
that are,
is 4 that we're
right,
we're trying to
they're
fill.
in training.
And we're actively involved in testing and recruiting. In fact, we
Okay.
have a test this week to bring.
Are you having difficulty hiring with some of the changed political climate around policing and just general?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Again, it's a tough profession, and our recruiting efforts are extremely robust. And actually, I've seen, thanks to Division Chief LeClair and his team, I've seen a positive impact on their recruiting efforts, and we're getting more high quality candidates, and so it's getting better, but it's still difficult.
And can I, if we were able to, come up with the $930,000 to staff up a little more, what would you do with that extra police officer? Where would that police officer be put? What would he or she be doing?
So those 6 positions would go to patrol in a way that would bring the feel that the community will feel one additional police officer on the street at all times, in essence.
So they would go to patrol. So that would be an additional car on the street, basically.
Yes. Now, I would like to also say in that program, first off, because we are already down 4 positions, by the time we would get to where we could hire 6 additional, we're looking well into the third quarter of this year. So the dollar value there that would reflect that. And also, I've worked with the city manager. We've had many discussions on this, on some options that we have internally within the police department to reallocate some personnel that could chip away at that number of 6 and possibly reduce that to 4. And then we've talked about a phased-in approach as well over time. Although I think I don't think we want to wait too long before we implement this, because the problems are occurring right now.
Yep. So, very good. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Member Anderson. Chief, I guess question for me in terms just digging into the data itself. Is there a time of day that most crimes occur across the city of Englewood? And then I'll ask a question about your zone, your different zones.
So we do studies, time of day, day of week, types of calls, and we structure our shifts around that. So to say, is there a particular time? No. One thing that I've experienced in the past 4 or 5 years is traditionally a day shift used to be a little bit more quiet than the afternoons and evening shifts. That's not true anymore. The 6 in the morning, 5 in the morning, it kicks off with a bang with the call load on day shift. We call it watch 1, and it continues all afternoon into the evening, into the early hours. For those of you that have done ride-alongs, you've probably experienced that. But we do study the day of week, time of day types of calls.
Thank you, Chief. And then in terms of, I think you're broken up into 3 zones, correct? Are your officers evenly distributed across those 3 zones and across the 3 shifts?
Yeah, so we have 3 districts, we call them.
3 districts.
And just to be clear, they're not the same as council districts, but they're we try to divide the districts up so the call load is equitable between those, and we take into account geography and roads like 285 and Santa Fe and but by the way, what I forgot to mention when we were talking about the call for the 2 officers per 1,000 formulas, that doesn't take into effect the commuters that we have in Inglewood. We have 2 of the busiest highways in the state of Colorado that come right through our city, Santa Fe and 285, and you can also throw Broadway into that. It also doesn't take in effect the employee base that's inside there as well. So sorry, I think I diverted myself from the question. Yeah.
No, you did ask in terms of the districts, and then I guess if they're evenly distributed across their shifts and zones. So I think you did answer that.
And what we had to do with the zone, so the 2 zone officers, remember the heat maps that Deputy Chief Fender showed? The bubble, the tornado bubble, looks like there's a tornado spiraling over the Civic Center, over Broadway and 285. Well, that's where we have our zone. The 2 zone officers are in a small geographic area outside of a typical district. A district officer generally has a larger geographic area to patrol, and the zone is more local.
Perfect. Thank you, Chief. Member Russell.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. So on the question that I have about the officers, so 4 of them are in training, and they're now not out on the street yet, and you're hiring 4 more. So when all 8 of those people get on, you're going to have the presence of 1 more police officer, correct? Or no, they're designated for something else.
So what that will do when we get these people out of training and the other ones hired and out of training is take us up to our authorized strength that we should be at, which is 78. That would give us the ability to have minimum staffing within our patrol, and then be able to release these special assignment officers, impact, traffic, zone, SRO to a certain degree, back the detective back into their current assignments. And then, but that's outside of the 6 additional that I had in the resources. I hope I answered your question.
Okay, well, you did to a certain extent. I would just like to say this, and all the time that I've been on council, probably the first 4 years, whenever John Collins and the police department would come, I wanted y'all to get 2 more police officers. And he kept saying no. I know Jill Wilson, prior to me being on council, always wanted that to happen. But traditionally, ever since I've been paying attention, so I've been on council 6 years plus, and probably 4 years before that I've been paying attention, we've always been short police officers. We never are fully staffed. So adding 6 more, how is that really going to help us? Okay, I'll just let you answer that question.
Yeah, well, getting fully staffed is a primary goal. Staffing is a primary goal, so we're committed to that. We also the program that you approved in the last budget cycle for 2022 were the 2 academy positions. So those are outside of our authorized strength of 78. That gives us the ability to recruit, hire, put somebody in the academy, and in anticipation of an opening that we have. So instead of being reactive, waiting for an opening to happen, then recruit and hire and train, which takes about 8 months before we get somebody on the schedule. This gives us the ability to bring somebody on, send them through the academy, send them through field training, knowing that we're going to get 3 to 5 openings a year just through retirements and general attrition. So it's our commitment to staffing is real. And with additional officers, it would be just as important for us to stay fully staffed.
I appreciate that. And then, I mean, even if we did get fully staffed and got 6 more police officers, with all of the problems you have here, is anything really going to change?
I believe yes. The answer to that is yes. We can look at crime rates. We can look at citizen satisfaction. We can look at visibility. It's hard when you make a change like this, when you make a decision to add people in this circumstance, because we don't have the parallel universe of what the crime stats or citizen survey would look like if you hadn't have done that. So we can show that adding more police officers, getting more police officers on the street adds to visibility. It adds to safety. It adds to rapid response. It adds to crime reduction. And those are all what we're trying to accomplish. Now, keeping in mind, we balance that with these other alternative policing programs that we talked about, as well as the other environmental changes that we can get from the community as well, to all get to the same point.
Okay, and then there's one other thing, and this has to do with dispatch. In the last month, I have had 2 different people call me just out of the blue. They are frustrated with dispatch and all of the questions that get asked and never get any response or leave a message. They're put on hold forever. And that's dangerous when there's a situation, and I will tell you, this has been 2 years ago, and I really had not complained about this at all because my mother's best friend died during COVID, but her son found her. And she had been laying on the floor for 3 days when he found her, and when he called dispatch, and I think this same thing continues to go on, the dispatcher just kept asking questions, and he finally said, "Could you please dispatch emergency help while I'm answering these questions?" I would like those issues addressed as well. I think that's problematic.
Yeah, I feel bad when I hear incidents like that, and I'm sorry to hear those circumstances. And part of what we're trying to do is through education and communication to the public, is that understanding that even though the dispatcher is asking questions, the call is still being dispatched, which is important to know. You have a call taker that's entering the information on their computer. You have the call sender, the one that's talking to the police officer that's reading that information and relaying that to the responding police officers or medics. But Division Chief LeClair, do you want to add to that?
No, I was going to chime in the saying that it, understandably, that can appear frustrating, but there is two dispatchers in there at the same time. So, and they're at least, and their computers are linked. So as one asks questions, the other one is reading it and dispatching it, because they don't want to put somebody on hold and miss out on any information. But I can understand how it appears that they're not the ones dispatching it, but they are. And in the dispatch center, we have recently just become fully staffed in there, so they are fully staffed and working at a full capacity, but they are trying to get the information as quickly as possible.
And I would I mean, if that's really happening, they should be communicating that with the person that calls in, because when somebody calls in for an emergency, I've had to do it myself in the past. It's been a while, but they want to know that help's on the way. So thank you.
I understand, yes.
Thank you, Member Russell. Mayor Pro Tem and then Member Noonekamp. Go ahead, Member Noonekamp.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you to all of you for being here tonight. I found this so deeply helpful, and especially as we're interfacing with members of the community who are experiencing challenges in our city, to have information that we can relay and to try to come up with creative ways that we can ensure that they understand all the good work that you're doing is really, really important. And I'm just really grateful that you're here. I do have, as the mayor alluded to, several questions. I'm going to try to keep this tight. And I appreciated the thoughtfulness and the kind of the holistic nature of how you're approaching things in our community. I think there's been a lot of really intentional work done over the last several years on a lot of these long-term and alternative solutions that I'm really grateful to see. And we're also experiencing a very real near-term challenge in our city and in our state and in the nation. And I think that's my first question is, I know this is, Chief, the last time you were here, I asked you a potentially unfair question, and this might be another one, but there are so many factors to consider here. We're coming out of this pandemic that changed so much human behavior. We're experiencing different legislation that's making, impact on the street. Are we experiencing a temporary wave based on those factors, or do you think that this is the new normal? I'm hearing there's a reduction in penalties for vehicle break-ins, and then also a 32% increase in vehicle break-ins in the same year. How are we attributing those things? And then also, are you speaking to other municipalities, and how are they also reacting to these changes, and are we learning anything from that?
These challenges are here to stay. The legislative mandates, the reporting requirements, the amount of time it takes for an officer to process a call for service. I believe that the safety ingredient for the police officers, that we talked about being a dangerous profession, those are real, and I don't see a shift in that. I think there definitely was a spike in crime during the pandemic, 2020 into 2021. It's pretty obvious, and will that be reduced? I don't know. I mean, you can follow trends of the economy, the impact that has on crime, unemployment rate. You can track that, and I don't have that magic bulb, so I can't necessarily say for that. But I can say that the mandates and the workload of the police officers is here to stay. The community's expectations are here to stay too.
That's helpful, thank you. In your request, there's obviously the 6 officers, but then there's also the desk officers for all of the additional paperwork. And I see you in your presentation responding to a lot of new standards and requirements that you're experiencing. How much capacity do you think that those 2 officers free up as it relates to the other needs you're experiencing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And before I answer that, I forgot to answer the second part of your other question, which is what other agencies are doing. And we pride ourselves on going over and above what other agencies do, that we're meeting the best practices. And I will tell you, our alternative policing programs are extremely robust. And when you compare those to other police departments, both locally, regionally, statewide, and nationally, we're the leaders. We are the leaders in these alternative policing programs. People are coming to us for guidance, and that's the best I can answer that question. As far as the force multiplier of a police desk officer, it's real. So they can generate possibly 12 to 15, maybe 20 reports a day. But keeping in mind, they're either walk-in lobby reports or their phone reports. These are reports that don't have a suspect attached to them. They're crime reports, they're property crime reports. If there's something where there's immediate follow-up that needs to be done, it still has to go to a police officer, which means a police officer coming in off the street for a lobby report, somebody that comes into the lobby, or to phone report, or the first-hand contact, if you will. But for those property crime, no suspect reports, they can handle a lot, and then that frees up the officers to be more proactive. And
were you gonna chime in?
Only if the chief's done. To just comment on the second part of your first question on what other agencies are doing, I think they're experiencing, well, I know they're experiencing a lot of the same challenges that we have. But like Chief Watson stated before, we have had people leave law enforcement, but they're not going to other agencies. What we are seeing are people leave other agencies and coming to us. And I think that's a testament to our community support, our staff support, our council support, our city manager support, and again, the programs that we've implemented that are working in our favor.
I appreciate that. Go ahead.
And one additional thing I'd like to throw in about the police desk officers, if a police officer responds to a call in person of a call that a desk officer could take by phone, when they're done with that report, they have additional documentation that they have to do that the police civilian desk officer does not have to do. So they'd have to go in and they'd have to tag their body cam. They'd have to download their body cam. They'd have to make sure case numbers are in the body cam. Then they'd have to go into a different program and do a citizen contact card that the 217 outlines, where we have to talk about gender, ethnicity, what we contacted them for, did we search them, did we do a consent search, did we pull a gun, did we do all these things. So the police officer, if they respond to that call in person, has that additional layers, have those additional layers of documentation that a desk officer taking a phone report wouldn't have.
That's helpful. Thank you. And this is my last set of questions is around community engagement. And I'm so excited to hear that you have this new communications role filled. And, you know, I think some of the crime prevention through environmental design work could be really powerful. I could see it partnering with our communications team and with our events team. And how are we engaging EPD with the community to ensure that people have that information, that they can feel safer? Because I think that regardless of everything that we're doing, people have busy lives and they don't always know what we're doing, and all they're experiencing is what, you know, their daily life and how they feel and the feeling of safety that they experience. And so I think providing them with more tools would be incredibly important. But when citizens are experiencing challenges in the community, and we hear a lot from them, right? I'm listening to Member Russell, I have my own. What do you recommend we do for someone who's just experiencing a challenge that might not rise to the level of, you know, a severe safety issue, but they're also frustrated and they don't feel safe? How can we engage them more in this conversation?
Doing exactly what you said, you know, is opening ourselves up, opening our programs, an information flow on community engagement. There's opportunities that we have, you know, Citizens Academy is a good example, community events, with a new community relations crime prevention person. Our intent is to get out in the community more, working with the communications team, Madeline, who's done the neighborhood identification and scheduling meetings and hearing and engaging with the community, what their expectations are, and passing on crime prevention tips. There's the physical part of it, getting out in the community and meeting with people, and whether to include the business community is important. There's also the influence of social media, of communications, of connecting with them virtually, whether it's a crime prevention video or tips, or posting things on the website, or getting those on social media, which we've done, but you'll see more of that, I'll guarantee it. And so I think the answer to your question is it's a situational approach. There's different people in the community that need that engagement. A business owner on Broadway in the 3400 block may be different than a business owner in the 4400 block, or maybe different than a resident, or maybe different than the commuter who is passing through a high accident location in the city, or the schools, the impact in the schools, or the parents' sense of safety when they drop their child off at school. The type of communication that we want with them. So it's a situational approach is how I'd answer your question.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you all for being here tonight. I think by and large, the Englewood Police Department has a pretty solid reputation with our community, and that speaks a lot to the work that everyone here tonight and all the officers who aren't here tonight have done for our community. So thank you. My first question is in regards to crime statistics. And when I think about crime statistics, it's a little slippery to me, because if I understand it correctly, we're saying that we have this many number of summons or citations or contacts for crimes that we have had in this particular geographic area, and that's why it shows as a hotspot. So our solution to that is we're going to increase our force in that area, which, unless I'm sorely mistaken, would actually increase the crime rate in that area, because we are making more contacts and the spot is effectively getting hotter before it cools off. Is that correct?
Thank you, sir. You're exactly right. In a community policing model, we encourage the community to contact the police, where maybe traditionally or historically they've been reluctant to contact the police. So you encourage them, you engage them, and you want them to call and make reports and be engaged. So there will be a spike, an increase in the number of calls, which gives us the opportunity to investigate them and work on them, with the intent of successful problem solving will then reduce the number of calls for service.
And
if that makes sense.
I guess a related question is similar to what Member Russell was asking. Have we seen a change based on the zone-based policing model that we have been applying over the last few years?
Yes.
Okay, because I look at that thing and it still looks hot as the sun. So
it's a hot spot, and it's influenced by a variety of reasons, and the influence of light rail, the influence of the civic center, the influence of the library, the influence of the bike path, the dynamics of the different businesses that are in the area. And one of our goals is to work closely with other city departments. In this case, it would be the business development creating an atmosphere that entices businesses to come into this area, that hotspot area or anywhere, and then to engage them and retain them. So when they have a specific problem, instead of getting frustrated because there's a lack of a police response and then leaving, that we work with them on trying to reduce the seriousness of the call. So some of those are intangible, because you possibly have a business that would have left that is now still here, or a business that never would have came here that now did come in. And so it's hard to put a number on that, because it is somewhat intangible. But it's those are positive examples that I can speak about.
That's helpful. Thank you. I think one of the other things that I would like to talk about a bit is the concept of communication just in general, and the way that police have traditionally communicated with civilians. And Member Russell hit on this a little bit. I think I would probably be slightly more gentle in my approach, but I actually had an incident similar to the one she describes, where I came home from work, my wife was on the bedroom floor, not conscious. Very, very scary. Scary, one of the scariest moments of my entire life. And I called, and I was panicked. And I called 911, and the person I talked to kept asking me questions. And the only thing I wanted to hear was, help is on the way. Like, we are on our way. And so I stopped answering questions. And I said, I'm not answering any more damn questions until you tell me that you rolled an ambulance. And they said, it's on the way. And I said, okay, next question. So, and they got there very quickly, and it was all handled very effectively. But that sort of in-the-moment communication, I think, is one of the things that we can do. Another similar incident occurred last month of a business owner that I know. There was a relatively, I don't know, some might classify it as petty crime, but there was a theft from his parking lot. And customer calls and is expecting to see a police officer face to face. That didn't happen. It just happened to be the same day that we had a SWAT rollout. So hearing that, I understand why we didn't send somebody to talk to him. But he didn't know that. Nobody told him. So this is one of the things I think that we can improve on if we are planning on diverting calls, or we are planning on not sending officers when civilians call, is to explain there's something big happening right now. We can't be at this location right now. If you'd like to talk to us, or you'd like us to send someone, you'll probably have a wait, but we'll try to get somebody out there. And that way I don't hear it. People don't call me, and I would really like that. So that is my second piece of feedback on that. And then the third item I have is relative to this staffing request, the 6 additional officers. And I kind of refer to it as the bench. Right now we have an authorized level of 78 officers, and we're down 8 according to what I heard. There are 8 officers who are authorized who aren't on the street every day right now. If our authorization level was at 78 plus 6, 84, then we would have effectively, well, I'm having trouble with the math right now, but you get the idea, right? There would be 6 more even when the bench was down by 8. That's why I support a larger authorized level of force, and I'm inclined to support the request here, all of them, frankly, because I think these are some solutions that we can apply to ensure that when our community members call, we're able to respond effectively, and we're able to give them the sense, when I see the police cruiser driving by Clayton Elementary School every morning during pickup and drop-off, I know that the police officers are in my community. I also know that hundreds of parents are dropping their kids off and seeing that police cruiser drive by. That's very helpful. It gives a sense of safety and security. So I'm perfectly willing to provide the additional resources and find a spot in the budget for us to do that. So thank you for giving us those needs. It's very informative.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Temp. Member Wink.
Thanks, Mayor. Let's remember that not finding a way to provide the 6 officers being requested means officers are being forced into overtime, as the chief mentioned. Based on what I know of the demands of their work, I think that we as a city don't want overly exhausted officers and overworked police on task for law enforcement. I think we also already have statistics on the stressors of quality of life and of mental wellness and emotional wellness of law enforcement inherent in their profession. And that list is, of course, longer than what I just mentioned. Some of us, unfortunately, know firsthand of even suicide among law enforcement and other indicators of these stressors. So, in my view, adding stress to our police team by deciding or considering, A, that we don't need 6 officers because that may yield no difference on the street, or B, it's acceptable to force them to not take a little time off, spend a little time at home with a spouse, especially given what Englewood has long known to be an excellent police team in our community, and C, that it's acceptable to ignore their wellness just to save money. I think it's not good enough. I think we can do better. And so, Council, I ask you to think of the entirety of tonight's presentation in considering the department's requests. I know there was a lot of information. I also want to say that I am the CML policy advocate, and so I'm happy to influence the legislative process in Colorado that helps your effectiveness, as you mentioned this evening. Member Woodward, I'm going to speak for you here. So, Member Woodward also supports this policy committee, and so I'm certain he shares my view on the matter and is happy to advocate for our team as well downtown. So in sum, like Mayor Pro Tem Ward just mentioned, I'm fully supportive of finding some way to fund the requests, all of them, made by our team tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Wink. Member Woodward.
Thank you, Mayor, or Mayor and Councilmember Wink. I do support Englewood Police Department. I'm very, very proud of the Englewood Police Department and have been for a lot of years. I do have, and I am in support of additional officers. If you need them, then I think that's a priority that we need to look for public safety. One thing I wanted to ask you about tonight regarding the strategy, if there is one, for the patrolling of Santa Fe, 11 o'clock at Saturday nights during the summertime, when what it seems to be drag racing of cars, motorcycles, anything going on with that at all? Seems to come down Santa Fe and then across Bellevue.
Yeah, we can research that more and get back to you. But street racing and speeding and general disregard for traffic laws is it is a real problem for Inglewood and surrounding agencies, and traffic enforcement is tough, especially down on Santa Fe. Once we all know the re-engineering that Santa Fe undertook years ago, and they increased the speed limit down there, and the officer's ability to set up in a way that can effectively make a traffic stop is really tough. Santa Fe and Dartmouth is one of our highest accident locations in the city, and that it even rose somewhat, or stayed the same, I should say, after the re-engineering years ago by CDOT. And but everything you mentioned is a problem, and maybe offline you and I can talk, and we can get some more specifics, and we can set up some extra patrols down there.
Yeah, I think especially last summer, I saw a lot of social media regarding that problem on Saturday nights. So that and Dartmouth and Broadway. So
I don't want to speak too much to it because I don't have all the information, but last summer there was a impromptu metro-wide task force that was put together to address that exact issue. One of our sergeants identified an issue along Bellevue and Broadway where they were meeting in the old Kmart parking lot, and we were able to rectify that situation pretty quickly. But we can definitely get more information on whether or not that task force is still up and operational.
Great. That's it for me.
Thank you, Member Woodward. I have a couple questions before I let. Actually, I have several more questions, but I'll ask two and then I'll pass it to Mayor Pro Tem. So, Chief, do you happen to know how our staffing compares to other cities per capita?
I can find that specific answer out. Are you talking officers per capita?
Right,
I'd have
yeah.
to do research. We have that. I don't have it at my
Okay.
fingertips. I know if you go back to that old, what I call the antiquated formula of 2 per 1,000, we're over that. 35,000 people in the city, that would equate to 70 sworn officers, and we're at 78. So we're over that. But I will say that most of the departments that I interact with, the surrounding agencies to Inglewood, the other metropolitan agencies, the forward-thinking agencies, the ones that are responsive to community needs, you base their decisions off calls for service, off crime rate, and off community expectations rather than population.
Okay. Actually, that's going to be another question I have later. But the second one, this may be for you, and actually this might be for the city manager as well, because I know that we talked about finding additional revenue for infrastructure projects and such things like that. But have we discussed it in terms of policing as well? Because this is a sizable increase when you look at it from an operational general fund point of view. Have we had discussions about that?
Thank you for the question, Mayor. We haven't had, I would say, extensive discussions. As the chief mentioned, one of the things that he would be looking at to potentially try to get us a little bit down from that 1.2 million is a reassignment of the zone officers to be part of the six, which would lower that to 4. And we would obviously be looking at position cuts within the general fund, keeping in mind that there are other departments that are equally understaffed and stressed and doing working overtime as well. So we really have to kind of consider all those together. One of the things that Mayor Pro Tem Ward and I have talked about is, as we've talked about a street and alley tax, should really, if we're looking at 1.2 million, we were looking at a public safety tax. And when we look at sales tax, 1% on sales tax is about 339,000. If you go up to 10% increase on sales tax, that's 3.3 million. So we could look at a range of taxes within that. Mill levy tax. 1 mil equals $879,000. So there are a variety of things we would do to try to fund this.
Thank you, City Manager. Mayor Pro Tem.
I missed this in my first round. You talked a little bit about the desk report officers. I've seen in Denver they have civilian crash units that do, I guess, traffic accident investigations. Is that something that we might adopt here in a similar method to the desk officer?
That's not something that we've specifically discussed, but the ability for that desk officer to, and let me preface this a little bit, the state accident report has changed drastically over the last couple of years. It's several pages long, it's very robust. It takes an officer a good amount of time to complete that now. Whereas in years past, it was 2 pages, you fill it out, you turn it in, you move on. The ability for that PDO or that desk officer to take that report and take that time off the patrol officer is massive. And then if you get several of those throughout the day, the course of the shift, like Chief Watson said, it's a force multiplier. And then they're also doing follow-up if there needs to be follow-up, which allows that officer to be back on the street, back in the high crime areas, back in the proactive policing philosophy, which is what we really want to implement.
So is that a yes or?
I mean, the civilian piece of it we have not discussed.
Okay.
The actual, and I know what you're talking about. I've talked to a few of those. A lot of them are retired law enforcement that take on those civilian positions. That specific function we have not discussed. No.
We do divert some of those accident calls. There's online reporting. You can fill out an accident report form, and so it's I think a broader question, if I may, in that the civilian response report takers. There are some models out there from other agencies where they have civilians respond to accidents or property crime issues. Is that something that our community wants or is ready for or would accept? Keeping in mind those incidents still have to be followed up on. So if you take an accident report, there's still follow-up that needs to be done by a police officer for that accident report, hit and run or a ticket to be issued. Same with a crime report for say a property crime if it wasn't a police officer that does that. So we still have to receive that call and input it into the record, into the record system and account for it and assign it a number and assign a detective. So
I think I got what I need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Member Russell.
Thank you, Mayor. And in addition to what the mayor asked, is it possible to find out how many, and maybe you asked this, how many officers Littleton has, and what type of policing they do? I mean, it seemed like from the crime statistics that Littleton, although larger in population, has lower crime statistics than we do.
We can certainly find out those numbers. I don't know them off the top of my head. I believe that their staffing size is pretty similar to ours, but not exactly. They're larger geographically. They're about twice the size geographically. Their population, I believe, is 45,000 versus 35. We know that their crime rate is lower. Their calls for service is lower. I know they have some similar alternative policing programs than we have. They have a traffic unit. They have SRO program. I know I believe they have a form of an impact teams. They have an impact team. They're developing their co-responder program. In fact, I think they just got their first co-responder read. Is that correct? Where we've had ours in place for quite a while. The mobile response unit, it's piloted in Englewood, but the intent is to roll that out into different cities, and Littleton being one of those. So they're similar, yet we're leading in these efforts. Why their crime rate is lower and their call for service is lower, that's a study on demographics and psychographics and other areas. One of the things that we're going to do with our crime relations community prevention person that we just hired is to have her go to other agencies and see what they're doing. Littleton will be one of them because of their lower crime rate, as well as some other agencies that are innovative and get some fresh ideas on some fresh programs. I do know the chief over there, and we've talked about some of these programs and policing techniques, and so that's partially where I'm answering your question from.
Okay, thank you. And I also want to say I appreciate each one of you and the entire police force and what they do. My concern is on Nextdoor, there are posts out there that people, because of the crime rate in Englewood, they're looking to move. And I don't know whether their perception is right or whether their perception is wrong, but we have to change their perception, especially if we're going to talk about a tax increase to fund anything. Because if the people in the city don't feel safe, it's not about us communicating. I think if there was more visibility in the community of police officers, I did see somebody at the Denny's parking lot. There was an officer in the ATV driving around the parking lot, and I appreciate that over there, because I know that when we asked for the crime rate over there, it was shocking to me. So I appreciate you're doing. I appreciate the troubles that you're all going through at this point. I know that being a police officer was always dangerous, probably even more dangerous now than it was years ago. So I appreciate that, but we need to get the public perception changed also.
And I appreciate those comments. And just to be clear, our success, and I've heard from a couple of you that, the support we have from the community and the good jobs that we do. And that's a direct reflection on the officers on the street, on the dispatchers, on the code enforcement, on the records people, everybody, the support staff that has firsthand contact. It's, we as a command staff put things in place for them to be successful. You may have heard me say this before, that we have well over 150,000 police employee citizen interactions a year. It's a staggering number of interactions that we have, and to use each one of those to its full advantage on the engagement side of it. And some of those are police officer citizen contact, some are phone calls, some are transactions through the records window, but it's a staggering amount. So our success is based on the officers and the detectives and dispatchers and code and fire marshal's office and records, and I just want to acknowledge them. And they're the hardest working, most dedicated group that I've ever been a part of. And that's where our success lies.
Thank you.
Chief, I still have a couple more questions. I'll try to be brief. I think you already answered one of them, but one of my questions is going to be about the growth that we're seeing in the city. Obviously, there's a lot of new development. Your answer previously stated that really the size of the force doesn't, or at least you're not looking at it in terms of just population. So based off all the development that's going on, you don't see the 6 do not really reflect the new growth that we're seeing in the city.
We're not basing it on the increase, but we monitor that. So we get the reports from community development and the increase in the population. We get reports from Department of Transportation for the increase of the commuters, and it all comes into play when it increases the crime rate or the calls for service or the special needs. Some of the multifamily places have special needs, let's say parking issues that overlap onto the street. So we try to adjust. In fact, we're bringing on a new parking management officer that can help with that, with some of the on street parking because of that development. So we do what we can to adjust, but we don't just merely base our decisions on increase in population.
Okay. And then Chief, I'll ask about the hotspots. You kind of touched on it earlier, but these hotspots seem to be pretty consistent based on my time on council when Chief Collins came here. It seems to be like the same hotspots, but your answer to Mayor Pro Tem kind of stated that we have been, if we increase the force on the hotspots, we're going to see, obviously the it's going to light up more often. So is it working? Is it not working in terms of the impact team? What we're doing in those areas, because it seems to be the Duck Pond area or Broadway 2885, the DDA boundaries basically. So
I will say I don't want to confuse zones with hotspots. So a zone where the hotspot map or the crime map, what do you call it? The heat map showed a specific area. That's a zone. That's a large geographic area. Broadway to Santa Fe, 285 to Floyd, or actually out to Dartmouth. And that's you're right. Under Chief Collins, that was identified as a zone, and we're putting extra resources in there trying to have an impact on that. Theory being, if we ever reduce that significantly, we could pick up that zone and move it somewhere else in the city that might be having a problem. The hospital district might be another. We're not ready to do that now. So that's the zone. When we talk about hotspots, those are smaller geographic areas. That's a group of people that are doing pattern crimes. It's maybe a house where there's or a garage where there's a chop shop, or burglaries are being staged out of, maybe narcotic sales. So that's a small geographic area, or a smaller group of people, pattern crime, that we're trying to have an impact on. So that's more of impact, and that's more of patrol response. Another hotspot is a high accident location. So that would be addressed through the traffic team. Hotspot could occur around the schools as far as the number of calls for service. So we have SROs that help serve that function. But I think it's very important to separate a zone from a hotspot. The hotspots have changed. We've had many of them just this year that we were successful at resolving. Very successful at small geographic areas, pattern crime. So we've cleared out a lot of those, and we're still tracking them. But you're right, the zone itself has stayed for the past couple of years.
So I guess just to clarify then, the hotspots are changing, but are they in the same general vicinity though? Are these still happening within the DDA boundaries, or along Hampton, or?
No, I think we may have confused some verbiage, and that may be my fault. The heat maps, we call them hotspots because it's a heat map that we have GIS generate, and so these aren't really, when I say hotspot on these heat maps, that's not what we are basing a quote unquote hotspot on. What the chief was talking about is we have hotspots that will be an address, okay, that we know that we have a high call for service on, or we know that the neighbors have called, a number of times on that address. Well, that's where we focus, say the impact team to that address. When we talk about these maps, these are merely, like the chief said, these are zones that we know that we have a lot of calls for service, or say our zone police officers are writing a lot of tickets in that area here at the city center. So that would make this heat map light up. That's not necessarily what we use as a hotspot. A hotspot might be a person that we know is dumping stolen cars at a certain area. So we're going to focus proactive enforcement efforts at that person. That would be a hotspot for us, not necessarily this heat map. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, because when I looked at these hotspot maps, I was thinking this is the area that we're seeing activity occur that is requiring the force.
That is true overall. That is where we have a lot of calls for service, or where we are doing a lot of proactive policing, which would make that area light up. But our enforcement status or our enforcement proactive enforcement status is really more towards single residences, people, or issues that people are experiencing in a certain area. That's really a hot spot, not necessarily a heat map.
Thank you very much for the clarification, Deputy Chief.
Just a small add to that. That when I know you've been to roll calls, and several of you have been to roll calls. When you sit there and listen to the information presented by the sergeant on crime data, I don't know if you met our crime analyst. She's usually at a lot of the roll calls. That's where the hot spot information comes. You know, the person, the location, kind of where we're going to focus our attention for the next shift or the next 2 or 3 shifts when officers do have free or available time. So if that helps.
That does help. Thank you, Chief. Any other questions from council? So I think the next steps is obviously as part of the budget discussions, unless anybody sees anything different, but as part of the budget discussions, we expect to see just an update in terms of what the level set what Inglewood Police Department needs for the coming years in order to improve the safety in the city. So go ahead, Chief.
Thank you very much, and I just want to acknowledge the impact that this has, the financial impact on moving forward, and it's like the city manager said, the impact that it has on the entire city budget, the impact that it has on other city departments who all have specific needs. There's a lot going on in the city that needs resources, and I don't want to give the appearance that we're immune to that, and I'm committed to. Our staff is committed to working with the city manager's office and the finance director, who I believe is still here listening, and to make this work if it's approved. So.
Perfect, Chief. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all to your entire team as well. Thank you for being very honest with your feedback on what was needed for the city. So, and thank you very much to council for the constructive feedback as well and all the questions. Thank you very much. Moving on to report for boards and commissions. If anybody wants to get us started, or if anybody has a report. No reports tonight. Moving on to council members' choice. Anything from council? Nothing from council. That's fine with me. I don't have anything else either. And then I'll just city manager's choice.
In the essence of time, no report from me either.
Thank you very much, city manager. I think I can now use the term. Now we are going to re-adjourn or adjourn again. So thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you next week. Have a good week.